Subtropical Gardening Podcast with Paul Plant.
Today on Subtropical Gardening Podcast, I'm going to be talking about a particular native Australian plant that's not a tree, a shrub, a climber, a ground cover. In fact, it's a native orchid known as the swamp orchid because of where it grows and how it grows. But there's more to the story and more to the beauty of this particular plant, and I'm going to broach both of those. Its endangered classification and even one of the latest new releases that every gardener who loves orchids should be trying to track down and grow. If you like the video and you like the podcast, please subscribe to Subtropical Gardening Podcast. And of course, thumbs up, and any comments, any suggestions, and any personal experiences you have with this ground orchid, this terrestrial swamp orchid, I'd love to hear from you in the audience. So let's get started. So first up, the name is Phaius, known as the swamp orchid. That's how it's known here in Australia. But overseas, a lot of people call it the veiled nun orchid. And it seems to be going through a little bit of an identity crisis. The botanists have been investigating the genetics of the particular plant to classify it correctly. Orchid growers are a little bit resilient to these changes, so I'll probably be talking about each of the two names as we proceed through this podcast. But first off, I've always known this plant as Phaius australis, and its new name is Phaius tankervilleae variety australis. Now, this means that the name is unplaced. It's still yet to be validated and confirmed. Now, this particular form or variety of the plant is native to southeast Queensland, where I live, and northeast New South Wales. Another species of this group, which is here in Australia, is Phaius australis variety bernaceae. Now, that has now been reclassified as Phaius tankervilleae variety bernaceae, and that's native predominantly and solely to southeast Queensland. Another one some gardeners might come across here in Australia is Phaius pictus from the highlands of northeast Queensland. Well, folks, the new name for that is Calanthe robertsii, a completely different genus, but it doesn't stop just there. Now, Phaius the tankervilleae as an overall genus. So this is an overall species of Phaius tankervilleae. The entire species has been reclassified as Calanthe tankervilleae. But as with name changes, I'll get to the varieties a little bit later. They have not been converted over to Calanthea or Calanthes. So this is the distribution of the Phaius tankervilleae. As you can see, through Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales, through Papua New Guinea, Asia, up through to China and over to India. It has quite an extensive spread, whereas the one that we know as Phaius tankervilleae or Phaius australis is just predominantly in New South Wales and Queensland. Now, if we look a little bit further, because I've said a lot of the Phaius have now been reclassified as Calanthea, this is the spread of the Calantheas all the way from the southern tips, just above me here, there, southern tips of the Northern American continent to the northern areas of the Southern America continent, over to Africa, and then again back to Australasia and that region. So the Calanthea has a much wider distribution than just the Phaius group of plants. And of course, this is the one that, as an Australian, I know that most gardeners here in Australia grow. It's this iconic image that you can see where the back petals and the sepals are almost like a reddy brown color tone. I find them absolutely fantastic. You then have the tube of the labellum, which is kind of sometimes yellow and then opens up to a pink labellum. And the column on the inside, which is where the pollen sits and all of that kind of stuff, is usually tucked in along amongst that particular tube. And I remember when I first did some research for the Subtropical Gardening magazine, which is long gone, one of the key things that we were able to separate the identity of Phaius australis with the Phaius tankervilleae was that the australis had a striated flowers on the petals and the sepals, and that the column was visible between the lateral lobes of the labellum. So the labellum kind of sticks out and then opens up at the bottom, whereas the tankervilleae formed a very distinctive tubes. Now, although now all of them are tankervilleas, I think the australis variety can probably still be identified by having a little bit more open of that tube structure, so you can see the column on the inside. I don't have a close enough image, but if you look really closely at that image on the right there, you will actually see a bit of a tube. And I think my next image, I've got it a bit closer up. Yes. So again, you can see the labellum, big, kind of like a big tongue sticking out at the front with a bit of a pink coloration, and then it goes in towards the tube that's more pink with a bit of a yellow throat. But that column that is actually the column of the flower is covered by the tube of the labellum. But it's a beautiful flower. Now these stalks can be anywhere from 1 to 2 meters tall. The flowers can be anywhere from 6 to probably 20 individual flowers on the stalk. Incredibly stately plants. And of course the leaves are possibly up to about 1 meter long as well. I'll get a little bit into that a little bit later. Now this image and the previous one were taken at the Coffs Harbour Regional Botanic Garden. And I believe right now, as of the late September, early October, they are in full bloom. So if you are in that area, definitely make your way there to have a look at them. I think most of the other botanic gardens try to grow these as well. I know Noosa Botanic Gardens has some in their shade house structure, and I know they're in bud. I don't know if the flowers have opened up yet. So definitely worth a journey to your local botanic garden to see if you can find these in flower, to look at them, appreciate them. Now, these are Australia's biggest terrestrial, which is ground dwelling, orchids that we have, and they are beautiful. As I said, flower stalk is anywhere from about 1 meter to 2 meters tall on a really good grown specimen, and the leaves themselves are about 1 meter long. And this is another specimen that was at the Coffs Harbour Regional Botanic Gardens, planted really close to the other previous one I just showed you, but the structure of the flowers, the structure of the scape, the inflorescence was quite different. The flowers, incredibly pretty and beautiful, but kind of more open and more kind of, I think, more elegant because of their structure. And that's pretty much how we see some of the native forms of it. But the good news is a lot of breeding has happened both overseas and in Australia, and they're crossing the different species to create new varieties, new cultivars, and new hybrids. And for that reason, there are more on the market for gardeners and for collectors. So this one is one I saw at an orchid show. I'm sorry, I do not know the name, but the sepals and petals at the back became almost brown, and the tubes were nowhere near as long. So the labellum out the front was not as stately, not as pronounced, but a very distinctive long tube. And once they start breeding in some of the yellow flower species of these, they get much more of a color spectrum. So there's some pinks, some creams apparently as well, but predominantly that's the main color range. And of course, folks, there is a brand new one that has just hit the market. And it's this little beauty plant known as the Lady Ramona Harris, looking at you. And it gets that name because it kind of displays itself right in front of you, so you can actually see them. And the colors of the sepals and the petals are much more subtle. The intensity of that labellum is almost like a blood red pink. It is beautiful. It is intense. The labellum tube is not as extensive, so you see the column sticking up out of that image, just popping out with a bit of light reflecting on that. The thing about this that's also really striking is that all those buds, as you can see in that image, are sticking straight up. They're almost pure white. And it's kind of deceiving because you think that the whole flower will open up as pure white, but it doesn't. It opens up with this incredible bloom. And the flower spike is quite large. And guess what, folks? I have one here. And this one is yet to flower. And this is kind of what you'll find if you went looking for one. A nice clumpy foliage plant. Mine has 3 flower spikes sticking up. All the pure white buds are absolutely beautiful. And they're now just starting to bend down outward, and then the flowers will open up. So I'm looking forward to that in the next couple of weeks as it matures to the flowering phase. It's I cannot wait. I'm very, very anxious waiting for this particular plant, this orchid, this native orchid to flower. Now let me just see my next, I think that's the last one of that set. Yes, that's the last one on that set. Now, going back to this particular orchid. Now, one of the fascinating things with the Phaius tankervilleae or Phaius australis, it was first described in Australia in about 1858 by Baron Fernando von Mueller. A lot of our native Australian plants have been named by Mueller, so they do have a Muelleri attachment to those particular names. They are, as I mentioned, predominantly in that tropical, subtropical climate. And the fascinating thing is that this is, and I'm going to focus on this one really importantly, it is an endangered species. And the reason is that the land is being destroyed for development. A lot of the swamps, which is the environment that it loves, is being dredged for urban development, for sand mining, for forestry, for all of these other things. I also remember when I was young, in the 70s, it was well known that ferries that were coming, or barges coming back from Stradbroke Island, a lot of people were stealing the plants out of the bush, putting them in their boots and bringing them back into Brisbane area, southeast Queensland area, and then selling them on, trying to make a quick buck. Unfortunately, back then, quarantine and environmental laws were not that good. I do hope that they are stronger these days. And to give you a little bit more about the occurrence of this particular, what's called the Phaius australis, according to the Queensland government, they report it as occurs from Cooktown in northeastern Queensland to Byron Bay in northern New South Wales. Also found on the large sand islands of Garry, North Stradbroke Island, South Stradbroke Island, and that one also in Papua New Guinea. It is predominantly found in the swamps and forests and also further inland. It likes not to be actually smothered in water, so not in a wet swamp, but in the fringes where it occasionally gets probably inundated, but the wet is underneath. So it needs a very rich, organic, fertile soil to thrive in, but the water is always low. The occasional flooding up or rising of the tide, although it doesn't like salt water, the rising of the water table might impact on the plant. It's very, very important to remember it doesn't grow in 100% water. It's not a bog plant where the soil is completely saturated. It likes a very, very moist soil, which means for gardeners, that's great news. We get to grow these plants quite well by understanding what they actually need. Oops, going back to the right image, my apologies. And for home gardeners, it's all about trying to create and replicate the environment. So in the bush, you might have trees around the whole plant. It's in a forest environment. It's in a bit of a dip where the leaf fall has congregated, so high in humus, high in organic matter. That depression means that water hangs around there a little bit longer, but the dappled light is very, very important. Now, I can give you a whole lot of other gardening tips on how to grow it, and I will a little bit later, but I thought I'd come up with some specific information from a commercial grower who has expertise in growing this to give you the exact advice on how to grow this plant successfully.
So this is the new variety that we've got on the market in the Phaius. This is Phaius Lady Ramona Harris Looking at You. And the reason it's received that name is because the flower sits up and looks at you. It's not like the tankervilleae, which nods down. It's a great plant, makes an excellent pot plant. As you can see, sizable plant, multiple spikes per growth. Quite regularly 3 spikes on a single growth. Once that growth finishes, it will then form 2 to 3 new bulbs, which will come through for the following year. So next year, this plant will probably have 6 spikes on it. It likes its water, like Phaius. In this nursery, they're called swampies because Phaius are regarded as the swamp orchid. They love their water. We grow them in a cocoa peat mix with perlite. You can put a water tray underneath them if you don't water them that often, and they will soak that water up. But when you do repot these, like this one here, I would probably pot into like a 10-inch pot or 250 ml pot. When you do repot it a little bit deeper. I know everyone says, no, you got to plant your orchids high, but these, pot them about 15 to 20 mil deeper, because what they'll do is they'll start to climb up. So as they climb up, you want to put the plant a little bit deeper each year so that it stays in the mix. Fertilising's easy, just a little bit of slow release fertiliser around the top. This is a 12 to 16 month slow release fertiliser or controlled release fertiliser. But yeah, just a great plant, requires gentle shade. This is where we grow them. It's only a 50% shade cloth over the top, and lovely flower, good display, and regular. They will flower consistently every year.
And as you heard from Sam, a commercial orchid grower, growing these plants, it's all about giving them bright light, fertilizer, the right media, and those conditions. And although a lot of the books that I've read and the references say it can handle dark shade, it can, but you may never get the flowers. Giving it a lot of water during winter is a no-no. Remember, this plant is naturally occurring in a particular climate where it gets a drier late winter and spring and a wet summer and autumn. So if you can reflect those same conditions in the environment, you end up with a better thriving, successful plant. So always try to do that little bit of research. Find out where a plant is from and try to mimic those conditions. The other thing Sam talked about was watering, fertilizing, and light. So always remember those key things. The other thing I'd like to just mention is propagating. So orchids can be grown by seed, but they can be temperamental. The easiest way to propagate these is by division. So when the plant gets large enough, so after flowering has finished, you can actually lift the plant up, divide it, and repot it in that potting mix that Sam talked about. The other thing is there is a method of making babies through a method called kikis. Now, kikis are like plantlets that are developed on the flower stalk itself after the flower has finished. Now, if you've ever grown crucifix orchids, that plant prolifically produces kikis all by itself, and you don't need to do anything to it. This plant doesn't produce it that easily. So what most gardeners do when they grow Phaius is that they cut it up into sections and then lie it horizontally on a bed of sphagnum and then let the germination, or I should say, let the kikis form after a period of a few months or so. So that should give you a little bit of an idea in terms of repotting and propagating in one go. But the plant is a beauty. It's a wonderful native plant to track down, to source, and to grow. This particular variety, though not Australian, does fit within the same spectrum of how to grow it and how to look after it. And yes, you could kind of nickname it an Australian native, but I don't think technically it is. If you've ever had any experience growing Lady Ramona Harris, looking at you, I'd love to hear your comments. I'd like you to write them, and I'd like that feedback because that will provide additional information for other people who are watching this podcast or listening. They can probably find out a little bit more about that particular plant through the comments here on YouTube. Is there anything else I need to mention? Well, the Phaius is a very, very large group. There's round about, well, now in Calanthes, there's 277 species in that very large genus. The Phaius has been split apart, a lot of them transferred over to the Calanthes. The one that we know as Phaius australis, as I mentioned, has retained the name Phaius tankervilleae variety australis. And that is the one, if you are an Australian native grower, try to track down and grow. But you're more likely going to find the variety, the cultivar, looking at you at your local retail nursery because it is tissue cultured, it is mass produced, it is available in your independent garden centre. So look for it and grow it. Now, is there anything else I need to mention? Probably that I encourage everyone to give it a go. And if you have enjoyed, that's about the end of the video. Each week on Subtropical Gardening, I will endeavour to cover a whole range of different plants and inspire you to experiment with plants and grow more plants suitable to your climate, whether you're in the tropics, the subtropics, or the warm temperate areas. If you've enjoyed the video and the podcast, please, I appreciate if you can give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you very much. Until the very next video. This is Paul, Plant Horticulture, signing out.
Subtropical Gardening Podcast with Paul Plant.